Chapter 7. The real cost of big blocks. I want to be able to run a full node from my home computer. Does anybody actually care about that? Satoshi didn't. His vision was home users running SPV nodes and full nodes being hosted in data centers. Gavin Andreessen, 2015. Excessive concern about the cost of big blocks looks irrational when you run the numbers. It does not take more than back-of-the-envelope calculations to see that Bitcoin can scale far beyond 1 megabyte blocks without substantially increasing costs. In fact, given the steep downward trajectory of the relevant costs involved, even at massive scale, they would not be prohibitive for home users, even though Satoshi did not expect regular users to run their own nodes. To have basic full node capability, the two major costs involved are data storage and bandwidth, both of which have plummeted for decades, along with the costs of technology generally. I have watched these trends from the front line. My company, Memory Dealers, was built to sell computer hardware. In the Bitcoin standard, Amos tries to explain why on-chain scaling is not feasible by going through the numbers. For Bitcoin to process the 100 billion transactions that Visa processes, each block would need to be around 800 megabytes, meaning every 10 minutes, each Bitcoin node would need to add 800 megabytes of data. In a year, each Bitcoin node would add around 42 terabytes of data to its blockchain. This is correct. If Bitcoin processes roughly 4,000 transactions per megabyte block, if Bitcoin processes roughly 4 transactions per second per megabyte block, then 800 megabyte blocks equals around 3,200 transactions per second, or 100 billion transactions per year. Anybody familiar with computers will know that 800 megabytes every 10 minutes is a surprisingly low number, considering that it enables Visa-level throughput. Yet, Amos comes to the opposite conclusion. Such a number is completely outside the realm of possible processing power of commercially available computers now or in the foreseeable future. I do not know where Amos got his information, but he is apparently unfamiliar with the costs of technology. Even at massive throughput levels, neither storage nor bandwidth costs would be significant for running a basic full node. Storage costs. Let's start with the most basic calculations and then show how to reduce costs even further. In September 2023, a quick search for 8 terabyte hard drives on newegg.com shows its first result as a Seagate Barracuda drive selling for $119.99. That's $15 per terabyte. If Bitcoin uses 42 terabytes per year, that's $630 or $52.50 a month. If we want to include the cost of a consumer-grade 6-bay NAS network attached storage device to connect the drives together, if we want to include the cost of a consumer-grade 6-bay network attached storage NAS device to connect the drives together, that currently runs around $670. Added together, that's a minuscule $1,300 per year. Just over $100 a month for storing 100 billion transactions. Even though these costs are already low, The actual storage costs are even lower because of the clever way Bitcoin was designed. Put simply, full nodes do not need to store the entire transaction history. In fact, all they technically need is the running list of addresses with non-zero balances in them, called the unspent transaction output set, or UTXO set. You can think of the UTXO set as the list of active cash balances without their corresponding histories. This makes the size of the UTXO set a tiny fraction of the historical record of all transactions. The record can be pruned away, where old, irrelevant information is discarded. Bitcoin miners often already run with a pruned blockchain. However, if a full node does want the historical record for some reason, it can easily keep as many months or years as it desires. Instead of storing all records going back to 2009, it could store just the last year's worth. So, instead of 42 terabytes per year, it might only store 42 terabytes in total, effectively turning the annual costs of storage into a one-time expense. A full node running at Visa levels and keeping the entire blockchain history would still only incur minor storage costs with consumer-grade hardware. These calculations do not even consider the inevitable reduced costs of technology in the future. Computer storage has a consistent record of massive price reductions over the past 70 years. Figure 2, computer memory and storage measured in US dollars per megabyte. This is a chart showing that in 1956, memory was $100 million per megabyte, and now it is about a penny per megabyte. And disk space was, in 1956, $100,000 per megabyte. It's now fractions of a penny in 2020. And we have flash drive space was, when it came out in about 2004-ish, it looks like, was maybe 50 cents a megabyte. And it's now, on this chart, about 2017, it was down to less than a penny per megabyte. And finally, solid state premiered around 2014 at less than a penny per megabyte, it looks like, and it is now down to fractions of a penny per megabyte in 2020. All those figures end in 2020. Let's see, which ones ended in 2020. Memory on this chart, just for the full discretion to be totally accurate, ends about 2017. The flash ends about 2016. Disk space goes all the way to 2020. And solid state goes to 2020. When Satoshi released Bitcoin at the beginning of 2009, computer storage cost roughly 10 cents per gigabyte. Since then, prices have come down more than 85% and are currently less than $2 per gigabyte. It's 0.015 per gigabyte. Contrary to Amos's claim that 800 megabyte blocks would produce enough data to be outside the realm of possible processing power of commercially available computers, the real storage costs would be affordable for consumers and minimal for most businesses. Bandwidth costs. Storage costs are not a realistic concern. So, if there is any merit to the small block philosophy, It must be that bandwidth costs would be prohibitively expensive with big blocks. The Bitcoin standard reads, a node that can add 42 terabytes of data every year would require a very expensive computer, and the network bandwidth required to process all of these transactions every day would be an enormous cost that would be clearly unworkably complicated and expensive for a distributed network to maintain. Once again, Amos makes confident pronouncements about the costs of technology, yet apparently without doing basic research on the topic. Satoshi himself addressed this concern all the way back in 2008, before he even released any code. He said, the bandwidth might not be as prohibitive as you think. A typical transaction would be about 400 bytes. Each transaction has to be broadcast twice, so let's say 1 kilobyte per transaction. Visa processed 37 billion transactions in financial year 2008, or an average of 100 million transactions per day. That many transactions would take 100 gigabytes of bandwidth, or the size of 12 DVD or 2 HD quality movies, or about $18 worth of bandwidth at current prices. If the network were to get that big, it would take several years, and by then, sending 2 HD movies over the internet would probably not seem like a big deal. It's worth noting a couple of things from this quote. First, Satoshi gave an estimate of $18 per day, more than $6,500 per year, to demonstrate how low the cost of bandwidth could be at scale, again revealing that he did not expect regular users to run their own nodes. $18 per day is not an excessive amount, but it is enough to dissuade casual users who do not have a way to recover these costs. Miners would have no issues, however. If each of the hypothesized 100 million transactions had a 1 cent fee, that would result in $1 million per day split among miners, or roughly $41,500 per hour, more than enough to recover their costs for bandwidth. Second, when Satoshi wrote that email in 2008, the average US cost of bandwidth was $9 for each megabit per second of data. 10 years later, it fell by a colossal 92% to 76 cents. The cost of bandwidth varies across the world, but the trend is down everywhere, and there's every indication this will continue. AT&T is charging American customers only $80 per month for 1 gigabit service and $110 per month for 2 gigabit. People already using fiber optic internet might not even see their bandwidth costs increase at all. To understand just how small these numbers are today, consider the data used by Netflix. Streaming an HD video from Netflix takes around 3 gigabytes of data per hour, and streaming a 4K video takes around 7 gigabytes per hour. If we take Satoshi's estimates for 100 gigabytes per day, that works out to roughly 4 gigabytes per hour, around 43% less than the hourly bandwidth used when streaming 4K videos from Netflix. While it's true that not everyone in the world is currently able to stream 4K videos to their home, the point is that the costs are exponentially decreasing everywhere. And in the developed world, they have reached a level where full node operators might not see their bandwidth costs increase at all. Undoubtedly, some nodes would not be able to handle the increased costs, but the capacity of the Bitcoin network should not be limited by those with the weakest internet connection. If Bitcoin only requires a gigabit level internet connection in order to run a full node that can process Visa level transaction throughput, the barrier to entry is not too high. Bandwidth technology has rapidly improved for decades and shows no signs of slowing down. When Satoshi predicted that sending HD movies over the internet would eventually be normal, that was 4 years prior to the rollout of Google Fiber in 2012, which was the first mainstream service to bring gigabit internet connections to home users. Fiber promised to be nearly 100 times faster than the average home connection at the time. Future bandwidth technology looks equally as promising. In 2021, researchers in Japan set a new world record for internet speed, reaching an unbelievable rate of 319 terabits per second, around 3.2 million times the current average US internet speed of 99.3 megabits per second. It will take many years before that technology reaches the market, but it serves as another demonstration that exponential growth will continue to be normal, with many breakthroughs still ahead of us. Bandwidth is simply not a serious concern for Bitcoin at scale, and by the time global adoption is reached, the costs will be more trivial than they already are. This led Gavin Andresen to conclude that Bitcoin did not have any serious roadblocks to scaling. In 2014, he wrote, "According to my rough back-of-the-envelope calculations, my above-average home internet connection and above-average home computer could easily support 5,000 transactions per second today. That works out to 400 million transactions per day. Pretty good. Every person in the US could make one Bitcoin transaction per day, and I'd still be able to keep up. After 12 years of bandwidth growth, that becomes 56 billion transactions per day on my home network connection. Enough for every single person in the world to make 5 or 6 Bitcoin transactions every single day. It is hard to imagine that not being enough. So even if everybody in the world switched entirely from cash to Bitcoin in 20 years, broadcasting every transaction to every fully validating node won't be a problem. The BTC network is producing blocks that are roughly 1 megabyte in size every 10 minutes, which is comically small, even smaller than your average cell phone picture. We are constantly streaming videos that can be orders of magnitude larger than 1 megabyte and transmitted over cellular networks, and the cost of data keeps falling. Bitcoin was intentionally designed so that regular users do not have to run their own node, but even at massive scale, the costs would not be prohibitive. Footnote. Some specialized businesses that need ultra-fast performance, like cryptocurrency exchanges or payment processors, could see higher costs due to RAM requirements, though these can be mitigated also. See Gavin Andresen, UTXO, http://gavinandresen.ninja/UTXO-UHOH. Second footnote. This is to 1 megabyte block size. Technically, these numbers have increased slightly after changing the metric from block size to block weight, but the total number of transactions per block is comparable. Explained further in Chapter 19. All right. Mr. Wonderful, I see you there. Thanks for dropping by. I know you're a tech bro, man, so you might like this one. The hijacking of Bitcoin. I saw it myself back in the day. So we're reading this for Roger, asking everybody to sign the petition. Keep our boy out of prison. It's good to see you here, though, man. I'm reading for an hour, and I'm going to record the book and go back and edit this out. But I wanted to stop and say thank you for dropping by. I read all night last night. Nobody made a single comment, so I'm glad you're here, man. You are an early adopter of the Tyler McConnell technology, Mr. Wonderful. I'm very grateful to you. All right, let's go on to Chapter 8. Chapter 8, the right incentives. Take a break in between chapters, get a little drink. A little, I'll show you what I'm working with here. The non-alcoholic IPA. Haven't drank in years, but Athletic Brewing Company, Free Wave, Hazy IPA. These are amazing. They taste just like Ranger. What was it? New Belgium Ranger? That was my favorite one back in the day. One more. All right, down to business. We're losing people. All right, here we go. Chapter 8, the right incentives. I think most people see all the digital signatures and peer-to-peer networking technology, but miss that much of the brilliance of Bitcoin is how the incentives are designed. Gavin Andresen, 2011. Bitcoin is not merely a software project or a computer network. It is an enormous, complex system that millions of people around the world participate in. To understand it, we have to examine more than just its software. Some critical features of Bitcoin are not coded at all. They are built into its incentive structure. Users, miners, and businesses are all incentivized to use Bitcoin in a way that benefits themselves and the whole network at the same time. The economic coordination can be harder to see, but it's just as important as any other technical detail. Why run a full node? Big blockers and small blockers disagree about the role of full nodes on the network, and this reflects a difference in thinking about incentives. In the small block philosophy, full nodes are supposed to play a critical role, despite a lack of clear incentive. Regular users are encouraged to run their own nodes, downloading and validating the entire blockchain just to use Bitcoin, even though it's a burden. When running a node for the first time, it can take hours or even days to sync up with the rest of the network. And it also takes up hundreds of gigabytes worth of disk space. For this reason, full nodes are generally not run on smartphones, making BTC much less convenient to use. Users are not rewarded for running this software. They simply gain the ability to validate blocks of other people's transactions. While this might sound like a great idea to a group of software engineers, it's not a realistic expectation for the rest of the world to follow. Most people will never run a full node because they have no reason to. It's too great a burden with too little a reward. If Bitcoin was designed so that regular people were forced to run their own nodes for the security of the network, it would be a critical design flaw. Compare this to Satoshi's SPV design, which allows wallets to be downloaded and synced instantly. You can use a BCH wallet on your smartphone as easily as any other app. BTC proponents like to claim that SPV has some theoretical security problems, but there have been no documented cases of users losing money because of it. It has a long, successful track record, and the most popular BTC wallet apps are actually using SPV or similar technology, or they are custodial wallets. Satoshi understood that heavy-duty infrastructure maintenance needed to be performed by people who were paid for their work, the miners, not everyday users. Another example of economic misunderstanding was Bitcoin Core trying to protect the smallest nodes from getting kicked off the network. The developers had multiple opportunities to increase the block size limit, but they didn't want to risk kicking any nodes off the network, no matter how small. In fact, there's a whole movement of BTC supporters putting full nodes onto Raspberry Pis, computers so small that they cost about $30. So it's no surprise that BTC can't scale. Every transaction on the network can still be processed with extraordinarily cheap equipment. From the perspective of scaling, the core developers did the worst possible thing. They throttled the capacity of the network to the capacity of the smallest players and did not understand that it's perfectly healthy to have the smallest nodes kicked off the network as it grows. As Satoshi said, nodes will professionalize into big server farms. That's what natural economic growth would look like. The hubris of central planners. Friedrich Hayek is one of the best known economists from the Austrian school. In 1974, he won a Nobel Prize in economics for his academic work. One of his most famous books is called The Fatal Conceit, which is a brilliant examination of the problems with centrally planned economies. He authored the famous quote, "The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design." The more you learn about how free markets work, the more arrogant it seems to imagine that a better system could be designed by central planning. Markets are unbelievably efficient at coordinating scarce resources, and yet they do so without any central authority setting prices and production quotes for things. Hayek's famous quote continues, "To the naive mind that can conceive of order only as the product of deliberate arrangement, it may seem absurd that in complex conditions, order and adaptation to the unknown can be achieved more effectively by decentralizing decisions, and that a division of authority will actually extend the possibility of overall order. Yet that decentralization actually leads to more information being taken into account. In other words, free markets allow for a rapid flow of information between buyers, sellers, producers, consumers, growers, manufacturers, and every other participant in the economy. They are all trying to figure out what types of products to produce, in what quantities, out of what materials, for what costs, in which locations, through which manufacturing processes, and so forth. There's literally too much information for a central planning board to figure it all out. That's why it would seem silly for any one person to say the correct price of shoes is $45 a pair. It depends on too many factors. What are the shoes made of? What is their quality? Where are they being sold? Rather than having some committee decide the price of shoes for everybody, it's better to let individual entrepreneurs set prices themselves inside the marketplace, which results in more information being processed and better overall coordination. These lessons are directly relevant to Bitcoin. Just like a free economy works better than a centrally planned one, a free Bitcoin works better than a centrally planned one. Bitcoin Core has been the central planning board for Bitcoin on many issues, whether it's imagining they know the correct block size, the correct level of transaction fees, or the correct number of nodes on the network. This is why Gavin Andresen said, "Central planning is why I would like to eliminate the hard upper block size limit entirely and let the network decide how big is too big." In economic terms, the block size limit in BTC is a centrally planned supply shortage. The demand for larger blocks is there, but miners are restricted from producing them because of an arbitrary limitation written into the software. BTC users are then forced to compete in an artificial fee market to get their transaction processed. The same thing happens in housing markets when central planners prevent new construction from being built. It causes a supply shortage and prices skyrocket. The basic economic principles of supply and demand apply to both the housing market and the cryptocurrency market. If left alone, miners will produce the best sized block to meet demand. The central planning tendency of the core developers was not limited to the creation of unnecessary fee markets. They even used the block size limit to try and influence which projects other developers were working on. Core developer Vladimir van der Laan explained, a mounting fee pressure resulting in a true fee market where transactions compete to get into blocks results in urgency to develop decentralized off-chain solutions. I'm afraid increasing the block size will kick this can down the road and let people and the large Bitcoin companies relax until it's again time for a blockchain increase, and then they'll rally Gavin again, never resulting in a smart, sustainable solution, but eternal awkward discussions like this. Not only did the developers think themselves wise enough to set a mandatory maximum on the size of blocks, they also thought they could use high fees to incentivize people to work on their preferred projects. They were fine with the network buckling because it would create urgency to develop decentralized off-chain solutions. Talk about a fatal conceit. Of course, what actually happened was an exodus of developers from BTC who simply joined other projects that were more promising. Trusting incentives, not individuals. The final part of Bitcoin's economic design that is commonly misunderstood is the role of trust. Just like the concept of digital gold has been taken too literally, the concept of trustlessness is also taken too literally. When Satoshi said that Bitcoin didn't require trusted third parties, he did not mean that no trust in any humans whatsoever was required. Bitcoin is economic in nature, which makes it social in nature, which means it still requires some trust in humans. For example, a BTC enthusiast might run his own node, verify every transaction on the blockchain, and think he's operating without trusting anybody. But he's mistaken. He is actually trusting many people that he's never met. He trusts that the developers of his operating system did their jobs correctly. He trusts that the CPU manufacturers did their jobs correctly. He trusts that every single company involved in the production of his computer did not bug his hardware. He trusts that his ISP is connecting him to the internet in a secure way. He's essentially trusting thousands of people all over the world, though he's not trusting them individually. Instead, he's trusting the system of economic incentives that coordinates all of them to produce high-quality hardware and software. Even if the people in the production chain hate each other, or might even hate him personally, he trusts that the system will sufficiently reward good behavior and punish bad behavior to produce reliable products. Bitcoin works the same way. The system was designed to operate without a central authority, so nobody has to trust any particular individual or company. But they do have to trust that the incentives are strong enough to create a reliable network. This trust cannot come from each individual analyzing the code for himself. It must come from seeing Bitcoin as a whole, which includes many humans and businesses acting in their own self-interest. When Bitcoin Core changed the incentives of the system, they fundamentally changed its whole design. Satoshi's system was not perfect and did overlook a key problem: the governance and funding of Bitcoin software development. Miners have strong incentives. users have the correct incentives. But developers' incentives are murky and can result in conflicts of interest. In the case of Bitcoin Core, the structure of their decision-making process was flawed and ultimately derailed the entire project. We have examined each of the fundamental 5 ideas for understanding the original design of Bitcoin. Number 1, Bitcoin was designed to be digital cash used to make payments over the internet. Number 2, Bitcoin was designed to have extremely low transaction fees. Number 3, Bitcoin was designed to scale with block size increases. Number 4, Bitcoin was not designed for the average user to run his own node. And number 5, Bitcoin's economic design is as important as its software design. It should be clear that it's not a question of whether Bitcoin Core changed the original design. The question is whether you like their changes. In my opinion, their new design is not an improvement. In almost every way, other than price, it seems worse than the Bitcoin of 2013. Quick break here. Oh, thank you guys for hanging out. I'm enjoying Roger's book so far, and we'll go straight on to Chapter 9. Chapter 9, the Lightning Network. Even the most vocal Bitcoin maximalists will admit that, in the long run, there needs to be a way to make Bitcoin usable as money in everyday commerce. But they do not want the base layer to provide the functionality. Instead, they want regular payments to be conducted on secondary Instead, they want regular payments to be conducted on secondary layers, like the Lightning Network. Small blockers have been arguing that the block size limit does not need to be raised because the Lightning Network solves Bitcoin's scaling problems. They made this argument years before Lightning even existed. Despite the hype, the reality of the Lightning Network is grim. It has several critical design flaws that make it insecure, cumbersome, and unlikely to ever gain mainstream adoption. Each attempt at solving Lightning's problems has created new layers of complexity that come with new sets of problems, a terrible sign from the perspective of software development. Here's a basic overview of the Lightning Network's design. The technology is based around payment channels, which is essentially a running balance between two parties. Say Alice opens a payment channel with Bob and funds it with $10. The initial balance would be $10 for Alice and $0 for Bob. If she sends him a $3 transaction, the new balance would be $7 for Alice and $3 for Bob. Bob could send her back $1, and the new balance would be $8 for Alice and $2 for Bob. None of these transactions are recorded on the blockchain. Their nodes keep track of the tally separately, off the chain. At any point, either party can close the channel, which then distributes the final balances to both people with an on-chain transaction. Payment channels are a neat technology that has been worked on since the beginning, even by Satoshi himself. However, they were not being worked on as a scaling solution. Instead, they were being designed for tiny micropayments and high-velocity two-way transactions, which are used in special circumstances like machine-to-machine payments. Payment channels are great for micropayments because they allow tiny amounts to be sent back and forth between parties without incurring on-chain transaction fees. The Lightning Network is an attempt to link payment channels together to create a secondary layer that can route everyday Bitcoin payments. that can route everyday Bitcoin payments. So if Alice wants to send money to Charlie, but she does not have a payment channel with him directly, she can route her payment through Bob, who does have a channel open with Charlie. For this service, Bob gets a tiny transaction fee. Ideally, the payments on Lightning would be instant, have extremely low fees, and could scale Bitcoin without having to increase the block size limit, since most of the transactions are happening off-chain. Unfortunately, Lightning does not work well in practice because it has several system-breaking design flaws. On-chain transactions. The most fundamental problem with the Lightning Network is that it requires on-chain transactions in order to use. Opening and closing a payment channel requires making on-chain transactions, and it is recommended to open multiple channels at the same time. These channels are not permanent. They require ongoing maintenance and are supposed to be refreshed annually. The requirement for on-chain transactions creates two critical problems. Number one, users must pay on-chain transaction fees just to open or close channels. If the base layer is being used as a settlement system between banks, these fees could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to connect to the Lightning Network. And number two, since onboarding to the Lightning Network requires on-chain transactions, it is mathematically impossible to onboard large numbers of people with 1 megabyte blocks. Problem one is straightforward, but it's often hidden from regular users. The most popular Lightning wallets are either custodial, which means users' funds are controlled by a company, or the wallet will commonly subsidize the on-chain transaction costs. Both situations are undesirable. Custodial Lightning eliminates all the benefits of using Bitcoin in the first place, and it's only possible for companies to subsidize on-chain transaction fees while they are low. If fees are consistently above $50 or $100, there is no way companies will continue subsidizing them. The Lightning Network does not avoid the pain of having high Layer 1 fees. Problem 2 is also straightforward and has been recognized since the Lightning white paper was written. With extremely limited block space, even if every BTC transaction was solely used for opening a payment channel, there is not enough space to onboard more than a few thousand people per block. Paul Stork, a notable BTC supporter and developer, wrote an article breaking down the numbers in more detail. He concluded that even if 90% of the block space is dedicated to opening channels, only around 66 million people can be onboarded per year. That means it would take around 120 years to onboard the world to the Lightning Network. He concludes, in other words, each year we'd only onboard 0.82% of the world. Worse, if channels last merely 1 year, then by January 1st, 2025, we will need to re-onboard the people who joined on January 1st, 2024. In that world, only 0.82% of Earth's population, max, can be bona fide Bitcoin users at any one time. Monetary network effects are very strong. You need to use the money that other people are using. So a 0.82% ceiling is not viable. Stork's proposed solution is to have a big block sidechain, explained in Chapter 13, that can onboard more users. My solution is to just use big block Bitcoin instead, which does not need the Lightning Network to be viable at global scale. The requirement to have larger blocks is why Joseph Poon wrote in the Lightning white paper, if all transactions using Bitcoin were conducted inside a network of micropayment channels to enable 7 billion people to make 2 channels per year with unlimited transactions inside the channel, it would require 133 megabyte blocks, presuming 500 bytes per transaction and 52,560 blocks per year. This is the author of the white paper, explaining that the Lightning Network at global scale would still require 133 megabyte blocks. Unlike today's small blockers, he then notes that 133 megabyte blocks are still a feasible size. Current generation desktop computers will be able to run a full node with old blocks pruned out on 2 terabytes of storage. The Lightning Network requires multiple on-chain transactions in order to use. Therefore, a 1 megabyte, 2 megabyte, or even 10 megabyte block size limit would make it impossible to be a real scaling solution. Regular users are not going to be eager to spend $50 or $100 to open a payment channel. But even if they were, the BTC block size limit is simply too small to accommodate mass usage. Online nodes. The Lightning Network requires users to run their own nodes. This fact famously perplexed Tone Vays, the popular Bitcoin personality. He apparently did not understand this basic feature, despite relentlessly promoting Lightning as an alternative to block size increases. In a YouTube conversation with Jimmy Song, he starts by fielding a question from the audience. Vays: here's a good question for you, Jimmy. Someone says, what benefit do I get from setting up my own Lightning node? Song: you can go and pay people, like in Lightning. Vays: wait a minute, I need clarification on that. Do I need to have a Lightning node in order to pay people through Lightning? Song: yes. Vays: really? Song: yes, because the only way you can pay anyone is by having a channel, and you can't have a channel unless you have a node. Vays: but do you need your own node, or do you need someone else's? Song: you need your own node. Vays: oh, wow. So every single person might need their own Lightning node? Song: yeah. The requirement to run your own node is difficult enough for everyday users because the nodes require ongoing monitoring and maintenance. But there's an additional requirement that makes it crippling. Each node has to remain online or they risk losing funds. The way Lightning is designed, while a payment channel is open, both parties have a history of all the previous states the channel has been in. An individual record for when Alice had $10 and Bob had $0. Then when Alice had $7 and Bob had $3, etc. When a channel closes, the final balance is broadcast by whichever party is closing the channel. However, instead of broadcasting the most recent balances, they can broadcast previous states of the channel, which allows Alice to potentially steal from Bob. Imagine that their last transaction resulted in a balance of $1 for Alice and $9 for Bob. If Alice closes the channel, instead of broadcasting the latest balance, she can broadcast an earlier state with an old balance, like when she had $10 and Bob had 0. If Bob does not catch her, then Alice will end up stealing a total of $9. The Lightning Network tries to solve this problem by making it risky to publish old channel states. If Bob catches Alice within a 2-week time frame, he can broadcast a newer state, demonstrating that Alice published an old one. If this happens, all the funds in the channel go to Bob. This is supposed to provide an incentive to not cheat, but it's a weak one. If Alice already has a low or 0 balance on the channel, she does not have much to lose by trying to steal. Also, in order to catch somebody, a node is required to be connected to the internet. If Bob's node goes offline, he cannot tell that Alice is stealing from him, and he can lose funds. This is why some Lightning proponents have suggested having a battery backup for nodes. Lightning developers have tried to fix this problem by creating watchtowers, which are third parties that watch over the channel to make sure nobody is cheating, even if one node goes offline. This new system adds another layer of complexity, and it requires watchtowers to be trustworthy and competent. Otherwise, users can lose their funds. The problem of trust is simply pushed back one more step, i.e., the watchtowers need their own watchtowers. In addition to the security risk, offline nodes cannot even accept payments, nor can they route payments for other people. Lightning requires both parties to be online at the same time, and the sender cannot send any arbitrary amount of Bitcoin to the recipient. The recipient must generate a specific invoice for the sender to fill, hence the requirement to be online. The requirement to be online is also a security risk because it means the user's Bitcoin keys are held in a so-called hot wallet, meaning it's connected to the internet. Standard security in Bitcoin has always been to keep the majority of your coins in offline cold storage, while only keeping small amounts in wallets that are connected to the internet. Hackers are far more likely to succeed when targeting hot wallets, which the entire Lightning Network is composed of. The only way to get coins from the Lightning Network into offline cold storage is by making an on-chain transaction. Liquidity and routing problems. Routing payments through the Lightning Network is another serious problem. Every payment needs to find a definite path from sender to receiver. If Alice wants to pay Donald, but does not have a channel open with him directly, she has to find a route to him through other channels. She might have to send her payment through Bob first, who then sends it to Charlie, because Charlie has a channel open with Donald. If Donald is not well connected enough with the network, if he does not have enough payment channels open with other well-connected parties, the software will not be able to find a path to him and the payment will fail. But merely finding a route is not sufficient. Each channel along the path also needs to have sufficient liquidity within it for the payment to go through. If Alice wants to send a $100 payment to Donald that routes through Bob and Charlie, but the channel between Bob and Charlie has only $50 of liquidity in it, the payment cannot go through. In practice, this results in frequent payment failures, especially for large value transactions. To understand payment channels better, the best analogy is that of beads moving along a string. A channel is like a string connecting two people, and the beads are its liquidity. Let's say Alice opens a channel with Bob and puts 50 beads on the string. To pay for coffee, she moves 5 beads from her side over to Bob's. Then to pay for a pack of gum, Bob moves 1 back to Alice. When the payment channel closes, assuming neither person is trying to steal from the other, Alice and Bob will receive the correct distribution of beads based on their final location. If there are not enough beads to process a payment, the network runs into liquidity problems. If Alice and Bob's channel only has 50 beads on it, it's impossible for them to route any payments that are larger than 50 beads. There's simply not enough beads to move. Compounding problems even further, to make a payment on the Lightning Network, a route must be found from Alice to Donald, where every hop has sufficient liquidity, and these balances are constantly in flux. Every time a payment is routed through Bob's channel, its available liquidity changes. Therefore, not only are payment channels constantly opening and closing on the network, but their respective balances are also changing too. Imagine billions of people using this system, each having multiple payment channels open with constantly changing balances. The simple task of routing becomes an extremely complex one, which might even be impossible to solve without widespread centralization of the network. Rick Falvinge, the IT entrepreneur turned Swedish politician, concluded in a series of videos about Lightning. Mesh routing is an unsolved problem in computer science, especially when you have adversaries in the network. I'm considering the Lightning Network a dead end. It is not going to gain adoption. It is going to remain a toy that will be tinkered with and eventually left by the wayside. Andreas Brecken, the founder of the popular SideShift cryptocurrency exchange, came to a similar conclusion. I asked him about his experience with Lightning for his business, and he said, "Routing is a serious problem on the Lightning Network. Payments frequently fail to route, and the way I have tried to mitigate this problem is by being connected to the largest exchanges. But even that does not solve the problem completely. I have to use software that estimates the probability of a successful payment. And if the percentage is not high enough, I simply do not send the payment. Frankly, large numbers of Bitcoin users are being tricked into thinking this thing can work. But after having incorporated it into my business, I just don't think it will." From a usability perspective, the best possible outcome for Lightning would be to have totally custodial wallets connected to the largest exchanges. But of course, that kind of defeats the purpose of Bitcoin in the first place. Brecken is correct. If the Lightning Network is going to have any chance of success among the general public, it will require massive centralization into a hub and spoke network and widespread use of custodial wallets. Hub and spoke model. Centralization is the one reliable way to lessen the severity of the problems with the Lightning Network. Custodial wallets eliminate the burden to run your own node and be online all the time. Routing is easier if everybody connects to the same giant hubs that have enough connectivity and liquidity to service millions of people. Connectivity and liquidity to service millions of people. If everybody opens a channel with PayPal, then the chances of finding a route are high. Big companies will not merely participate in the Bitcoin economy. Users will be forced to rely on them to have basic payment functionality. And just like with custodial wallets, they can be easily censored and cut off from the rest of the network. The centralization of the Lightning Network is inevitable and has been predicted for years. In fact, it's even been the subject of academic research. The structure of the network is called a hub and spoke model, resembling the spokes on a wheel, where small nodes connect to larger nodes, which are connected to a few supernodes. Figure 3, diagram of a hub and spoke network. That's what he just described. There's 3 big nodes in the middle, other nodes connecting to the 3 big nodes, and smaller nodes connecting to the 3 big nodes in the middle. Hub and spoke network. Crucially, this is not a distributed peer-to-peer network where nodes connect directly to each other. With on-chain payments, Alice has a direct connection to Donald. With Lightning, Alice must go through Bob and Charlie first. The largest nodes become essential to the smooth functioning of the entire network, and these huge nodes will have the power to censor. They will be hosted by companies that are easy to regulate, and when they are taken offline for whatever reason, due to failure, regulation, or simple maintenance, the connectivity of the network will be seriously damaged. Everyday users can be completely severed from the network if their link to a central hub goes down. Alice might not find any route to Donald without being forced to go through the equivalent of PayPal. A group of academic researchers wrote about these risks in a 2020 paper entitled Lightning Network, a second path towards centralization of the Bitcoin economy. They wrote, the BLN, Bitcoin Lightning Network, is becoming an increasingly centralized network, more and more compatible with a core periphery structure. Further inspection of the resilience of the BLN shows that removing hubs leads to the collapse of the network into many components, and evidence suggesting that this network may be a target for the so-called split attacks. These researchers put forward several mathematical and empirical arguments which demonstrated that the centralization tendency is inherent to the network design, and concluded, the tendency to centralization is observable even when considering weighted quantities, as only about 10% of the nodes hold 80% of the bitcoins at stake in the BLN, on average, across the entire period. These results seems to confirm the tendency for the BLN architecture to become less distributed, a process having the undesirable consequence of making the BLN increasingly fragile towards attacks and failures. Liquidity problems also add to these centralization pressures, along with the requirement to use a wallet that is always connected to the internet. Most people will not be willing to lock up thousands of dollars in their payment channels, especially because of the increased risk of being constantly online. This means large payments will inevitably be forced to route through large corporate payment hubs that have sufficient liquidity and technical skills to ward off hackers. The inevitable centralization of the Lightning Network is ironic, considering the mad crusade the core developers took to avoid centralization by overhauling Satoshi's original design. Not only is Lightning infinitely more complex, clunky, and less reliable than on-chain transactions, the network will end up being orders of magnitude more expensive for every user because the on-chain payments required to use it will cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And if a user ever gets banned from a central payment hub, they will be forced to make additional on-chain transactions to maintain connectivity to the rest of the network. If these transactions cost thousands of dollars each, then getting banned from the hubs will prevent most people from using Bitcoin at all. With Satoshi's design, the network can be disrupted by an expensive 51% attack. With the Lightning Network, the cost of disruption will plummet. Governments or malicious actors can simply target the largest payment channels. If they can knock out a handful of critical hubs at once, then the network will become virtually unusable. Hash rate is not required. A false promise. The viability of BTC now relies on the development of secondary layers. If the secondary layers cannot deliver cheap, reliable payments, then BTC has no way of scaling, at least not without admitting spectacular failure and raising the block size limit, or by total centralization with custodial wallets. The way the technology currently stands, the Lightning Network will not be a serious solution to the problem of high on-chain fees, and it will not enable regular people to use BTC in commerce. Payment channels are a neat technology, but they are not a scaling solution. They might be helpful for micropayments, as Satoshi thought, but not for everyday transactions. Perhaps some future technology will be developed which would rescue BTC. But for now, the original design working on BCH remains the best system for fast, cheap, peer-to-peer payments online. The simplicity and elegance of the system are unmatched. Fees remain low. There are no requirements to run your own node. Payment hubs are not necessary, and there's nothing preventing secondary layers from being built on top of BCH. In fact, the larger block size allows for even better functionality of secondary layers. I want Lightning to live up to its promises, because if it could, then the world would be a better place. But I currently have no reason to believe this will happen. All signs point to it being a failed experiment, an embarrassment to the core developers, and a demonstration that the Bitcoin maximalists pushing this technology as a replacement for on-chain transactions were completely wrong and have misled millions of people. It's hard to imagine a more effective way of disrupting Bitcoin than what actually occurred. Over the course of several years, BTC changed from the best payment system on the internet to a slow, expensive, unreliable one. Satoshi's brilliant design was discarded for the promise of a future technology which has not lived up to its hype. This failure has both innocent and malicious interpretations. Bitcoin's story might simply be an example of bad project management, but given the disruptive power of this technology, it looks more likely that Bitcoin was sabotaged by its enemies. All right. So we will stop there. We read our hour. We're going to pick up next time at part 2, Hijacking Bitcoin. All right. So let's stop in Audacity. Hit save so we don't lose it. And reading this got me, I wanted to show you guys. I imagine if you guys are into this, you've probably seen this before. But let me stop sharing that and minimize this. I want to show you a quick visualization of what Roger is talking about here. Many of you have probably already seen it, but if not, I want to show it to you because it's the best way when I teach people about it. This is what I like to use. This is txcity.io. There's also txtown. You know what? I've never been to txtown, and it doesn't work anymore. txcity.io. All right. Let's hit present and share browser tab right there. And here you can see, this is a good way to visualize different blockchains. So you can see over here on the left, you got Ethereum, and over here on the right, you've got Bitcoin. Ethereum takes off, I think it's like every 15 seconds, something like that, 14. It should tell you up here, it's 8 cents to get on one right now. Bitcoin, it's 59 cents to get on Bitcoin right now. So the one Roger's talking about when he talks about BCH is Bitcoin Cash right here. So we'll switch to that so you can see the difference here. When he's talking about making the blocks bigger, you can see how much bigger this bus is. All these people are waiting to get on the Bitcoin block. And Roger's whole point with this book is why not just make the bus bigger so we can all get on it. As you can see, there's 34,000 people waiting to get on this bus. Their fees are too low. There's only 51 people waiting to get on this bus because they almost always get on the next bus completely. You can see all these people are waiting. Every 10 minutes, a block is found. If you just make the bus bigger, the fee is 0.001 cent over here. With the tiny buses, it's 63 cents to get on the main Bitcoin bus. So they're making some new things over there. I will say for me, you can't see it on here. Monero is a good one to kind of see. Monero uses ring technology, so you can't see who's coming from where. But it has a dynamic block size. It's very small, but if more people got on it, the bus would grow. Arbitrum is a second layer on Ethereum. So that's not really a good example. I wish there was a really fast layer 1 that I could show you. There's not really one for Avalanche, but let me see. I think maybe I can show you this one. I learned about Avalanche through the Bitcoin Cash subreddit. Everybody wanted to incorporate Avalanche on Bitcoin Cash because it's pretty much instant. I think it takes 14 seconds. No, it's like 3 seconds for a transaction to totally clear on the other side. There's newer, faster ones coming out that are even faster, like Monad clears in I think it's half a second. There's a really good one that'll show you. Maybe it is AvaScan. Yes, this one will let you see just how quick blocks are on Avalanche. Each one of these is a block. So that's how fast those buses are taking off. Every few seconds, one's taking off. So you can see how fast that can be. That's Avalanche. So, all that to say, be sure to, there is now, I've put it down in the bottom. I said I wasn't going to go through each one of these. You can go to freerogernow.org. Make myself big here. freerogernow.org. I will put that up there because I think that's important. That's where you can sign to help Roger stay out of prison. The guy that wrote this book, he's caught up on some BS tax charges, kind of like Julian Assange. They're going after him probably for writing this book. They'll probably come after me for it too one day, but hey, that's good. Came after Jesus as well, so I'm in good company. But that's it, freerogernow.org. There's also a link down there to buy his book. There's links if you want to support me as well, but make sure you support Roger and Steve before you support me. All right. Thank you guys for checking out version 3 of the audiobook, and we'll keep it going until we're all the way done. And then hopefully, if I can muster the focus, I can go back through and edit out my mistakes and upload a high quality version for you, perhaps. But I kind of feel like I'm probably going to do that. Like doing it live, it keeps me motivated to keep doing it. But since I've already put it out there, it doesn't really motivate me to fix it. If I record it on my own and then upload it as one big file, that motivates me. I don't know. It's like I'm still trying to nail the motivation link, the big surprise. But then sometimes I'll just quit in the middle. So I don't know. I just gotta get my live stream streak going and keep it up. So anyway, sorry for ranting about my personal problems. It's really all about you, Roger, and signing that petition, man. Thank you for an awesome book. And from one truth teller to another, I love what you're doing and support you 100%. So God bless Roger and Steve and all you out there listening. I'll see you next time for part 4. Peace.